What on earth is going on? Mom passed away from an illness, didn't she? The diagnosis was clear. Yes, she did. There's no doubt Mom was sick. Then why are the police here? My name is Catherine. I'm a 36-year-old housewife primarily focused on homemaking and childcare. I also work a part-time job 3 days a week. My husband Albert is a school teacher. He's strict with our children's discipline, but he's a wonderful dad who cherishes our family. We have 2 kids, a 5-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. They're at ages that require a lot of attention, so every day is hectic. But I have a strong ally in this journey of parenting. My mother-in-law, she lives nearby and is always there for us. She actively helps with the kids, which is a huge relief. I rarely visit my parents since they live far away, so I rely heavily on my mother-in-law. She always welcomes me with a warm smile, and I adore her for that. However, a change came into our harmonious relationship. My father-in-law's retirement at 65, he retired from his job. He had always been dedicated to his work, and now he seemed lost without it, staying at home all the time. To be honest, I didn't know him well. Unlike my mother-in-law, I rarely saw him, and when I did, he was always quiet, mostly reading the newspaper. But after his retirement, I was taken aback by how controlling he became, always keeping an eye on my mother-in-law. It might sound harsh to say he was watching her, but that's how it appeared to me. He would criticize the way she washed dishes or folded laundry. I couldn't help but think, if you have so many opinions, why don't you do it yourself? He was always hovering around her, constantly giving unsolicited advice. At first, she would argue back, but over time, she just seemed to give up and stay silent. She even stopped her morning walks because he would insist on joining. He would watch her every move, even when she was gardening. I could see her spirit fading away. I tried inviting her out for shopping or lunch to cheer her up, but he would always tag along. It wasn't fun anymore. I missed the carefree chats I used to have with her. Now, our conversations were either interrupted by him or cut short because he would want to leave early. Gradually, I found myself avoiding visits to their home. I discussed this with Albert multiple times. He would occasionally check on them, but he couldn't get his dad to stop this overbearing behavior. Albert often said, "I'm thinking of getting them divorced. It's too hard on Mom." But Albert's 2 sisters strongly opposed the idea. They had moved away and weren't aware of the current situation. We spent our days worrying about what's going on. One day, after a long time, I visited them. "Is everything okay, Mom? You look pale." I noticed she looked unwell and was sweating. "My back has been hurting since morning." "We should go to the hospital. Where's your health insurance card?"
"It's not necessary. I think it's getting better. She will just rest a bit."
"But she doesn't look well and also seems to be in a lot of pain."
"I said she's fine. Maybe she just hurt herself somehow. I'll take care of her, Catherine. You should go home." "But I said leave."
Despite being yelled at by my father-in-law, I stood my ground. "Catherine, it's okay. I'll just lie down and rest. Don't worry." I noticed my mother-in-law forcing a smile, so I decided to step back for a moment. I planned to call Albert, and once he returned, take her to the hospital, even if it meant forcing her. By the time I realized this decision was a grave mistake, it was too late. I still regret that moment. After leaving their house, I called and explained the situation. He said he would leave work early. I also reached out to my sister-in-law, telling her that something was off with Mom, but Dad was refusing the hospital visit. I asked her to persuade him. About an hour later, when Albert returned, we rushed to their house. Pushing past my father-in-law, we found my mother-in-law unconscious in her bedroom. Realizing it was too risky to drive her, we called an ambulance. Still, my father-in-law was shouting,
"You're overreacting. This is a nuisance."
Soon, the ambulance arrived and they took her. Albert and I followed in our car. My father-in-law didn't come. After a while, at the hospital, my sister-in-law arrived. "Is Mom okay?" "Dad wouldn't tell me anything. Catherine, I'm so sorry." Why is everyone making such a big deal? Their reactions were so different that I was shocked. Seeing my mother-in-law unconscious and yet seeing how calm Charmaine was made me distrustful. Not long ago we were informed that she had passed away. The doctor said there must have been various symptoms leading up to this. When asked why we didn't bring her to the hospital sooner, I couldn't answer. I regretted not visiting them more often and not noticing the changes in her. I wished I had forced her to the hospital when I saw her earlier. Tears wouldn't stop. Both Albert and Joanna comforted me, saying it wasn't my fault, but making them comfort me, especially after losing their mom, made me cry even more. After that, even though we were grieving, we were swamped with tasks, preparing for the wake and funeral, contacting relatives. Maybe these tasks should have been for her natural child, but I wanted to be involved as much as possible because I loved her. With the whirlwind of tasks and deep sorrow, my memories of that time are blurry. I remember clearly only after the funeral. Albert and I, along with Charmaine's and Joanna's families, gathered at their house. Albert and I were cleaning up her room, as usual, or maybe even more so now. My father-in-law did nothing. He continued living as if nothing had happened. Sometimes he would ask for help with chores, but Albert always declined. From the living room, we could hear the children playing. Everyone was either cleaning or relaxing. As I sorted through her clothes, slowly coming back to reality, I found myself keeping more items than discarding. When I opened a drawer with small items like handkerchiefs, I noticed a false bottom. Out of curiosity, I checked and found a diary. It seemed well written. Feeling guilty, I skimmed through it and found something shocking. I quickly showed Albert, and I could see his face turning from shock to anger.
What is this?
Albert, I'm sorry. Based on what I believe, I need to report this right now. Ignoring Albert's plea to wait, I immediately called the police. If what was written in my mother-in-law's diary was true, she was abandoned by him. About 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang, while the unsuspecting family was resting. When I opened the door, several police officers entered and I handed one of them the diary. After skimming through it, the officer nodded and proceeded further into the house.
What's going on?
Hey, stop it! Both my father-in-law and Charmaine were surrounded by the officers. Joanna and her husband looked on in shock while Albert and I moved the children to another room.
What happened? We would like to discuss the circumstances of your wife's passing. You're Charmaine, correct?
What's this about? Mom died of an illness and we have the diagnosis. Well, it's true, Mom was definitely sick. Why are the police here then? She was sick, but if she had gone to the hospital, she wouldn't have lost her life. Joanna and her husband couldn't hide their shock at these words. Mother-in-law left a diary. She wrote about how her body hurt, but she couldn't even afford to go to the hospital. On other days, she mentioned how Charmaine wished she would just disappear. Mother-in-law had documented the daily verbal abuse from father-in-law in her diary. Not only from father-in-law, but she also wrote about how Charmaine would call her almost daily begging for money. And when she refused, Charmaine would lash out with harsh words. It's also written here that you guys, knowing mother-in-law was a wealthy heiress, prevented her from going to the hospital to get her inheritance. Mother-in-law had every right to live. She didn't need to die. I couldn't hold back my tears as I spoke. Father-in-law looked pale while Charmaine seemed indifferent. Well, what could I do? My husband earns a meager salary and I need money for socializing with my mom friends for my child's kindergarten. Just the other day they were flaunting their new designer bags. If I don't have the same, they will exclude me. Dad used to give me an allowance, but since he retired, he said he's broke. When I talked to Mom, she told me to stay away from such friends. If you're not on my side, it's no problem if you're gone. Charmaine's selfish reasoning made both Albert and Joanna clench their fists in anger. Albert, trying to stay calm, gently held my hand and I felt the tension leave his grip. Looking over, I saw Joanna being comforted by her husband. See, you guys have someone to protect you. My husband, with his low salary, doesn't stand up for me. I'm just unlucky. Charmaine's husband quickly looked away, clearly not wanting to defend her.
Sis, I also earn a low salary. That's why Catherine works part-time to help out. She does more than her fair share, and I want to make her happier. What are you doing for your family?
Charmaine bit her lip in frustration.
Dad, you've always spoiled her. Why did you abandon Mom? She was cheating on me. You might not even be my son. She got what she deserved. When did she cheat? You've been following her around since you retired. Well, she did it behind my back. Just last Sunday, she met her lover. Were you not with Mom last Sunday? You're always with her. How long were you apart? I followed her everywhere, even when she said she was going shopping.
Father-in-law seemed more panicked the more he thought about it.
We were never apart. I was always watching her.
Then,
who told you about Mom's affair? It was Charmaine.
All eyes turned to Charmaine.
You lied?
Well, it's funny. I told Dad that Mom was cheating, and he quit his job to stalk her.
I can't believe. What have I done?
Father-in-law's face turned pale and he collapsed.
I've always doubted her. I've said terrible things. She told me she felt sick last week and wanted to go to the hospital, but I didn't give her money. I believe Charmaine when she said Mom was faking it to meet her boyfriend.
With a weak voice, father-in-law broke down in tears.
I promised to make her as happy as our son when we got married. What have I done?
A police officer pulled a sobbing father-in-law to his feet. No matter how much you regret or cry, your wife won't come back. We'll continue this at the station. The police took away the still crying father-in-law and the sulking Charmaine. Later, when Albert and I visited the police station for questioning, we learned that Charmaine was in deep financial trouble. As she had said herself, she became stubborn, trying to assert dominance among her close mom friends. Originally a high-maintenance woman, she married a man from an average family. Despite her husband and in-laws' objections, she insisted on sending her child to a kindergarten frequented by the wealthy. Once she joined the flashiest group there, she began to indulge in luxury lunches and brands to fit in, eventually accumulating debt. Unable to confess to her husband, she turned to her father as usual, but he had quit his job and couldn't lend her money. Her mother never took her seriously from the start. Turns out, her mother-in-law came from significant wealth. While sorting out her belongings, they found bank statements under mother-in-law's name with amounts they had never seen before. She had hoped to rely on her wealthy mother, but after being coldly turned down, she wished she could just inherit the money. She began feeding lies to her father-in-law, causing him to stress out mother-in-law. Mother-in-law's health deteriorated faster than expected, which pleased her. She kept telling father-in-law it was just a minor illness and not to take her to the hospital. Because of her selfishness, mother-in-law tragically lost her life. In mother-in-law's diary, there were messages written to Charmaine. It read, "Don't be swayed by others, understand what truly matters, and I hope you realize what's essential and live a happy life." Things she couldn't say to her face. Showing her, this didn't change Charmaine's heart. She ended up in police custody for a while. Father-in-law consumed by grief is likely to be given probation, but he will still have a criminal record. Even though they can't meet anymore, I hope he reflects on his actions. In the end, Charmaine and her husband decide to divorce, with the father getting custody of the child. She never thought it would come to this. Only when her child was taken away did Charmaine break down in tears. She probably realized the gravity of her actions only after losing what mattered most. She is said to cry every day, wanting to see her child. Albert and Joanna were devastated as their family fell apart, especially with both the father and Charmaine having criminal records. Was the diary written by mother-in-law to someday reveal the truth to someone? Or was she planning to serve father-in-law divorce papers and claim compensation? Now, no one will ever know the real story. But I feel relieved that the truth about what happened to mother-in-law is out in the open. I dearly miss mother-in-law, but the time I spent with her was genuine. So, I want to keep moving forward. If my son ever gets married and brings home a daughter-in-law, I hope to be as kind-hearted as my mother-in-law was to me.